They called him the Hurricane from Honduras, a man who walked through disaster as if it were nothing. On the day of the 1948 NFL Championship, Steve Van Buren almost missed history because he thought an epic blizzard had canceled the game. Yet this was the same player who would drag the Eagles through snowdrifts and into football legend, rewriting every rule for what a running back could be. First to ever rush for 1,000 yards twice, 4 rushing titles, 2 NFL championships. But behind those records was a man forged by tragedy and hard labor, who genuinely doubted if he belonged. There will never be another Steve Van Buren, and when you hear how his greatness began, you'll understand why. La Ceiba, Honduras, December 28, 1920. Steve Van Buren came into the world under the thick, humid air of a port city built on the banana trade. His father, an American fruit inspector, and his mother, with roots stretching back to Wales, gave him a name that would one day echo through stadiums. But before he ever saw football, life handed him loss. Before age 10, both parents were gone. No inheritance, no safety net, just a boy and his brother, suddenly alone. They packed what they could, boarded a ship bound for New Orleans, and left behind everything familiar. The Gulf crossing was no adventure, just fear, confusion, and the tight grip of a sibling's hand. Arrival in Louisiana meant new guardians, new language, new rules. The city bustled with jazz and streetcars, but for Steve, it was all foreign noise. He was an outsider, a quiet kid with a thick accent and no parents to lean on. School hallways offered little comfort. Classmates saw a stranger. Teachers saw a boy adrift. Humility wasn't a choice. It was survival. Every day, Steve moved from one small challenge to the next, learning to keep his head down and his hopes even lower. The world didn't expect much from him, and he learned early not to expect much from the world. But deep down, something was building, a stubbornness, a quiet strength, forged by every loss and every lonely night. Long before he ever touched a football, Steve Van Buren was already fighting for every inch. A 16-year-old dropout, Steve Van Buren walked through the iron gates of a New Orleans foundry with nothing but a thin frame and a stubborn will. The air inside was thick with smoke and sweat. 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The work was simple, but it was brutal. Hauling 30, sometimes 40-pound iron bars from the furnace to the anvil, swinging a hammer over and over until his shoulders burned. Sparks flew, bellows roared, and the heat pressed down like a second skin. Every load he lifted added weight to his body. Every hour at the forge carved muscle onto his arms and back. There were no coaches, no teammates, no cheers. Just the steady rhythm of metal meeting metal, and a boy turning into something harder than iron. By the time 2 years had passed, Steve was 30 pounds heavier. Gone was the undersized kid who had been told to forget about football. In his place stood a young man with hands calloused from labor and a back built for carrying weight, on the field or off. The foundry didn't just change his body. It taught him about pain, about pushing through when nobody's watching, about earning every ounce of strength the hard way. That was the real training. Before weight rooms, before science, before anyone thought a running back could be built like this. In the heart of New Orleans, a future legend was forged, one swing at a time. Steve Van Buren came back to Warren Easton High School with a new body and a new edge. Gone was the skinny kid who had been told to quit. Now he weighed 155 pounds, arms thick from iron and fire, legs built for power. Coaches noticed. So did everyone else. They put him on the field, and he did not just play, he took over. That season, Steve racked up 110 points, scored 16 touchdowns. No one in the country put up numbers like that. He was a force, breaking tackles, outrunning defenders, dragging half a defense with him if he had to. It was not just the stats. It was the way he played. Relentless, unselfish, always blocking for teammates when the play called for it, never boasting after the whistle. Word spread fast. LSU scouts showed up, notebooks in hand, watching a kid who looked like he had been built in a machine shop. For 3 years, he had been used mostly as a blocker, sacrificing his own glory so others could shine. But now, with the ball in his hands, he turned every touch into a highlight. By the end of his senior year, LSU offered him a scholarship. The boy who had been told to forget about football was now the most talked about high school player in Louisiana. Steve Van Buren had earned his ticket out, not with luck, but with sweat, grit, and 110 points scored the hard way. Senior year at LSU. Steve Van Buren finally got the ball in his hands, and he turned the entire college football world on its head. After 3 seasons of blocking for others, the coaches moved him to tailback. He didn't just fit the role, he owned it. That fall, he led the nation with 98 points, running through, over, and past defenders who had no answer for his power or his breakaway speed. Every Saturday, the box scores told the same story. Van Buren in the end zone, LSU on top. Then came the Orange Bowl. Texas A&M was favored, but Steve had other plans. He scored every single point for LSU, 2 touchdowns, an extra point, and a field goal. 19 points in a 19-14 victory. One man carrying the weight of a program and delivering under the brightest lights. The press called it one of the greatest single-game performances in bowl history. Scouts who'd once overlooked him now scrambled for a closer look. For the first time, Steve Van Buren wasn't just a workhorse. He was a headline. The quiet kid from Honduras, who'd spent years doing the dirty work, had just become the most dangerous player in college football. The NFL was watching, and for the first time, Steve started to believe he might belong there too. 5th overall pick, Philadelphia Eagles. Most rookies would have rushed to sign, but Steve Van Buren hesitated. 3 weeks passed. The contract sat on his kitchen table, unsigned. Not because of money, not because of leverage, but because he didn't believe he was good enough. The front office grew restless. Local papers speculated about holdouts and big city nerves. But behind closed doors, Steve just stared at the offer, wondering if the NFL was a world he belonged in. Coach Greasy Neal called, more than once, trying to convince the quiet kid from New Orleans that the Eagles needed him. Neal saw something the league hadn't seen yet, a back who could change everything. When Steve finally signed, he didn't make a scene. No press conference, no promises, just a handshake and a nod. Then he stepped onto the field and made every doubter eat their words. From his very first snap, he ran with a purpose. Power between the tackles, speed around the edge, eyes always forward. He didn't just play offense. He returned kicks, covered punts, even picked off 5 passes as a rookie defender. By season's end, the Associated Press put him on the All-Pro first team, the only rookie in the league to earn that honor. Teammates called him unstoppable. Coaches called him a franchise. Reporters called him a phenomenon. Steve Van Buren just called himself lucky to have the shot. The man who thought he wasn't good enough had just become the NFL's new standard. Steve Van Buren wasn't just a great back. He was the blueprint for something new. 6'1", 200 pounds. A frame built in the foundry, but moving with the speed of a sprinter. Old-timers said he could run the 100 yards in under 10 seconds, a number that still turns heads, even if it lives somewhere between fact and legend. Most backs in his day were either battering rams or breakaway threats. Steve was both. He ran with fullback power, dropped his shoulder into defenders, and never once looked for the sideline. But when he found daylight, he left defensive backs grabbing at air. He didn't just rack up yards, he set the standard. First man to rush for over 1,000 yards, twice. 1,008 in 1947, 1,146 in 1949. In an era of 12-game seasons, when fields were mud and blocks were legal anywhere, that was unheard of. He didn't just hit double digits in touchdowns. He did it 3 separate times. No one before him had managed that. 15 rushing scores in 1945, 13 in 1947, 11 in 1949. Each season, the rest of the league was chasing his numbers. He could carry the ball 30 times in a blizzard, then turn around and return kicks or play defense. Coaches started asking, how do we get a guy like that? The answer was simple: you couldn't. Steve Van Buren changed what a running back could be. Every franchise since has been searching for another one. None have found him. December 26, 1948. Philadelphia disappeared beneath 8 inches of snow. The city paralyzed and streets buried and silent. Steve Van Buren woke up at home, saw the whiteout, and figured there was no way anyone would play football in this. He poured coffee, settled in, and waited for word. The phone rang. On the other end, Coach Greasy Neal's voice cut through the static. "Steve, where are you? We're playing. Get to the stadium." He pulled on his coat, braced himself, and stepped outside into a world that barely looked real. The buses weren't running. Taxis had vanished. So he started walking, head down, boots crunching through drifts, breath turning to steam. Then he found the first trolley, inching along the frozen rails. He climbed aboard, rode as far as it would go, then switched to a second, and then a third, each one crawling slower, each stop farther from the stadium. When the tracks finally ended, he still had 6 blocks to go. Waist-high snow, wind howling, numb fingers gripping his bag. He trudged every step, never thinking of turning back. By the time Van Buren reached the locker room, most teammates were already suiting up, shocked to see him. Some had doubted he'd make it at all. The game itself looked impossible: swirling snow, slick turf, every breath a fight. But in the fourth quarter, with the score still locked at 0, Van Buren took the handoff, surged behind a wall of bodies, and crashed into the end zone. The only touchdown of the day. Eagles 7, Cardinals 0. When the final whistle blew, fans stormed the field, hoisting Steve onto their shoulders, carrying him through the blizzard he'd conquered. That day, toughness wasn't just a word. It was a man. 3 trolleys, and 1 impossible touchdown. In 1949, the Eagles faced the Rams with everything on the line. This time, the field wasn't frozen, but the odds were just as steep. Los Angeles had the league's top offense, a roster stacked with stars, and every expert picking them to win. It didn't matter. Steve Van Buren ran through them like they were tackling shadows. Carry after carry, he pounded the middle, bounced outside, shrugged off defenders who thought they could slow him down. By the end of the day, he'd rushed for 196 yards, a championship record that stood untouched for 38 years. No one in the crowd could believe it. Not the Rams, not the writers, not even some of his own teammates. The Eagles didn't just win. They shut out the Rams, 14-0. 2 straight years, 2 championship games, 2 shutouts. No other team in NFL history has done it since. Van Buren was the engine behind both. He didn't need headlines or highlight reels. He let the scoreboard and the stat sheet do the talking. First man to rush for over 1,000 yards twice. First to lead the league in rushing 4 times. When the Eagles needed a play, they handed him the ball and watched the impossible become routine. By the final whistle, the Rams were beaten. The Eagles were champions, and Steve Van Buren had stamped his name across every record book in the league. He didn't celebrate with a dance or a speech. He just walked off the field, helmet in hand, as if he'd done nothing special at all. That was his way. Dominance in silence. History written in cleat marks. By the early 1950s, pain was just another part of Steve Van Buren's game day routine. Novocaine shots before kickoff, battered knees wrapped tight, fingers taped and swollen. He never asked out, never let on when the hits hurt more than usual. The price for carrying a franchise on his back was paid in silence. In 1952, it all caught up to him. A torn knee ligament, the kind that ended careers before modern surgery. He walked away with no complaints, just a nod to the doctors and a handshake for the equipment man. The Eagles' locker room felt the loss. When the team was given a choice, pick the coach or Van Buren, his teammates didn't hesitate. They chose Steve, not for the stats, but for the way he led by example, never with words. The stories about his humility grew into legend. After the 49 title, a Hollywood reporter tried to introduce him as the Clark Gable of the Eagles. Van Buren just blinked. "Who's that guy?" he asked, more interested in the ice tub than any brush with celebrity. Fame never changed him. He was a star in the record books, but in person, he was still the foundry kid who never expected to belong. Chuck Bednarik, the toughest man on the toughest team, called him the best player in football. Modern analysts say he was the original every down back. Power, speed, and durability, all in one. The Eagles had never finished higher than 4th before he arrived. With Van Buren, they won 3 division titles and 2 championships in 5 years. His number 15 hangs in the rafters, his name on the NFL's 75th and 100th anniversary teams. In today's world of highlight reels and social media, his kind of leadership feels like something from another era. A legend built on bruises, not on boasts. There will never be another Steve Van Buren. Steve Van Buren was the first NFL player to rush for over 1,000 yards in 2 separate seasons, a record set in just 12 game schedules. He led the league in rushing 4 times, powered the Eagles to back-to-back championships, and retired holding every major rushing record of his era. The evidence shows his impact began in a New Orleans foundry and culminated in the blizzard-choked end zones of NFL history. What remains less clear is how a player so dominant could remain so humble. Van Buren rarely spoke about his achievements, leaving only the statistics and testimonies of teammates to speak for him. Today, every franchise still seeks a running back who combines size, speed, and selflessness as he did. The circumstances and character that shaped Steve Van Buren were unique to his time and place. According to the official records, there has not been, and may never be, another like him.